What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. And if you've got shares of Nvidia in your account, you're currently making a tea time for Thursday and making reservations at a steakhouse, because the last of the major tech stocks reported their Q1 numbers after the bell, and it was as good as we've ever seen. This stock is popping over 25% in the after hours. When we come over and look at this from a technical perspective, I am having to put a fake green candle in here that just essentially goes off the charts. We'll talk about this from a valuation, a technical perspective. We'll look at some other options. Some of you might be like, this stock's run away, or maybe you already have a position in this and it's grown to be this gigantic position in your portfolio. Well, there's other ways to continue to play the upside. We'll talk about some other ways to do that as we move through the show. Now, obviously, we got to get into this Q1 quarter. We'll take a look at the revenue, the profits, all those types of things. And it wasn't just this quarter, it's really the subsequent quarters that, in my opinion, that is setting this stock higher. Now, I just got off the conference call, listened to the whole thing, and I haven't heard a more bullish conference call since probably 2020, when the government was giving everybody free money. Now, year to date, this stock is up just 113%, and that doesn't include a 25% rise in the after hours. Over the last year, you're up 90%, and over the last 5 years, you're up just 400%. This stock just continues to go higher. Now, revenue in the most recent quarter came in at $7.19 billion. That was actually a decline year over year by the tune of 13%, but it did beat expectations wildly by over $670 million. So they knocked it out of the park in this quarter. But where Nvidia really hit not just one grand slam, but really back-to-back grand slams, is the Q2 outlook. Folks, Wall Street was expecting a number at $7.11 billion in terms of revenue. That would have represented 6% growth year over year, and Nvidia said absolutely not. We're going to do over 50% better than that. They're going to put up $11 billion in revenue when Wall Street was expecting $7 billion. That is for the upcoming quarter. Now, the reason why I wanted to tune into the conference call, because I knew the very first question that people would be asking management over as Nvidia is, can this continue? Can this type of rapid revenue increase that we've seen, and unexpected revenue increase that we've seen over at Nvidia, can it continue? And we got an unequivocal yes, yes, and yes from management. And that is why the stock initially was up 14% and just continues to go up as we are recording this video. So what you're going to see over the next couple of days, certainly through the rest of this week and into next week, is a re-rating of the stock from a revenue perspective. And then people are going to back into these earnings. These earnings estimates, which are up quite a bit year over year, expecting 100% growth, that is going to rapidly accelerate. The revenue, not going to be $7 billion next quarter. It's going to be close to 11. Q3 is probably going to be a number very close to that, if not higher. Q4 as well. When you look for the full year, Wall Street was expecting just $30 billion in revenue, or about 12% growth. This company has a shot at probably coming darn near close to $50 billion. So it's going to cause a complete re-rating of the stock from a revenue perspective, and then obviously from an earnings per share perspective as well. When we come over here and look at these numbers, you're going to see very good gross margins. Now, are they as good as last year? Not quite, but this company is going to be able to maintain margin and expand revenue. That is going to dramatically expand your net income, otherwise known as your earnings per share. So we're going to see a re-rating of this stock from that perspective as well. That is all coming over the next couple of days and week ahead. Now, the company's Q1 was good, wasn't great, but again, management reiterated on the call the fact that Q2 is going to come over 50% above expectations when it comes to revenue, and so is Q3, and so is Q4, and so is out into infinity until competitors start to catch up because Nvidia is well ahead of the other competitors, namely AMD. And while AMD is likely to have a product on the GPU side that is somewhat competitive to Nvidia, where is Nvidia going to be at that time once that product comes to market? It takes years. It takes years to develop these types of advanced chips, and Nvidia is likely a year or two ahead of all the competition, depending on who you ask. Some might even say they're upwards of 3 years ahead of competition. That should allow the company to continue to generate large amounts of revenue and profit for the foreseeable future. You see the data center, absolutely explosive. Sequentially, quarter over quarter, year over year, you're seeing growth, probably the highest number they've ever put up at $4.3 billion. Gaming's still struggling a little bit, but a massive acceleration over where you were a quarter ago, $1.8 billion up to $2.2 billion last year. They were at 3.6, so that's a segment of the business to continue to come back. If you get cryptocurrencies making a bull run, which certainly you look at this stock, it's going to lead a lot of the markets higher, probably a lot of risk assets going to perform relatively well, at least in the shorter term. Also interesting is their automobile segment ticked up just marginally sequentially, but year over year, essentially a double. That led to $7.2 billion worth of revenue, which is well north of $1 billion more than they were a quarter ago. Again, though, down from a year ago, but more importantly, when we start to look at Q2, they're going to go from $6.7 billion up to over $11 billion. In their guidance, they gave you a plus or minus another 2% on this. My guess is they're going to come over that $11 billion mark. Now, what's also holding up are those gross margins. That's very important. As you start to expand that revenue, holding those gross margins will mean obviously, a lot of that money will flow down to the net income and the EPS of this company. The other thing that they talked about on the conference call is their partners that they have manufacturing this chip, namely Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturer, TSM. They are locked and loaded to deliver the demand and the product that Nvidia has. Obviously, it would suck if you had supply chain or if you had bottlenecks there. Didn't sound like on the conference call they're going to have any problem meeting demand. Obviously, there's probably somewhat of a shortage, and you just can't get by infinity amount of GPUs or the H100s that Nvidia has. But the company's likely not going to have a lot of supply chain constraints, which is also very important. Also, TSM's customers, some of their other customers, not doing quite as well as Nvidia. So TSM's going to have the capacity and maybe give better discounting and better margins to Nvidia as they start to ramp up their business as well. Now, come over here to the brass tacks of the numbers, the $7.2 billion worth of revenue. Again, about $1 billion less than where we were a year ago. Your gross profits, though, remained relatively strong. Our gross profit coming in at $4.7 billion. Again, it takes 2 to 3 years, I think probably 3 years at least, to develop new chips. The company continues to spend on R&D about $1.9 billion this quarter compared to a year ago when they spent about $1.6 billion. Your total operating expenses coming in at $2.5 billion. It is down considerably from a year ago when they were at about $3.6 billion, but you have this acquisition termination cost. This was likely the ARM acquisition that Nvidia tried to do. I think it was around $50 billion. There was a termination cost baked in there when regulators did not approve that deal. If you strip that out, operating expenses actually up year over year, but not a lot. And what you have to factor in is sequentially next quarter, we're likely to do about $11 billion in revenue. I would assume the margins are going to be kind of in this low 60s, mid 60 type percentage range. So you can back into a gross profit, add a little bit to the R&D sequentially, and this company is going to print a massive amount of money to their income from operations, well north of $2.1 billion that they did this quarter. They're going to print even more next quarter. And then when you look out into Q3 and Q4, it just all makes a lot of sense why this stock continues to rocket higher. Now, from a balance sheet perspective, there's nothing to worry about. The company has plenty of cash, very little debt. In fact, when you look up here, their net expense on the debt is actually a positive. They have interest income of $150 million. They spent about $66 million servicing that debt. So they actually make money on their balance sheet. So there's absolutely nothing to worry about there. From a cash flow perspective, paints a glorious story when you pull down a $2 billion net income number, which is higher than a year ago, largely because of that termination breakup fee that Nvidia had to pay. Even when you factor that in, boom, $2.9 billion worth of positive cash flow. Last year, you were sitting at $1.7 billion. They don't do a lot on the investing activities because they have a great partner in TSM that does a lot of the manufacturing, so they don't have to invest a lot in property, plant, and equipment. And then when you come down here to the financing activities, they don't really do a whole lot. They don't have a buyback. They don't really have a lot of uses for this positive cash flow, something investors, well, they're not going to be worried about right now. Start looking forward a couple of years, maybe they'll want to see something done. Now, obviously, this stock is worth right now $760 billion. Tomorrow, another 20, maybe 30% higher. Who knows? We're essentially looking at a $1 trillion company that's doing, on a good day, $3 billion worth of operating cash flows. Clearly not cheap, but what the market is factoring in is there's going to be a complete re-rating of this stock as you start to look out for subsequent quarters. That is essentially a fact at today's time. It's essentially a fact that Q2, Q3, Q4 are going to be gigantically better than expectations. Now what investors have to start to ponder is as you start to look into calendar year 2024 or fiscal year 2025 for Nvidia, how much better is it even going to be? Wall Street wasn't expecting $11 billion till July of 2025, essentially 2 years from now, and the company is going to do $11 billion next quarter. And so, look, the stock soaring actually makes a lot of sense. And we've put a big, gigantic green candle. This one's gone parabolic. There's nothing really to think about this from a technical perspective. I assume I don't assume. There will be pullbacks in this at some point. There wasn't a large amount of short interest, so you can't attribute this. Sometimes you see these large pops and it's short interest, not in a name like this, not in a name that pays a small dividend. If you were short this name, you have some cojones of steel and certainly a lighter wallet after tomorrow. Pullbacks certainly to the previous all-time highs at 330 maybe could be bought. Just certainly depends. Now, a lot of you are watching this video. You probably already own Nvidia, okay? And so maybe you bought 100 shares or you bought 10 shares. It doesn't really matter. My guess is with this type of performance, it's grown into like your number one position. So maybe initially it was like the fourth or fifth largest stock, but because it's performed so well, now it's so large and you're wondering what to do. Well, first of all, you let your winners run. You don't cut bait anytime early unless you absolutely have to. There's other ways to play this. You're going to look at TSM tomorrow. This stock should rally pretty hard. In fact, in the after hours, TSM is up 8%. There's other semiconductors from a design standpoint. You've got AMD. This stock up 9% in the after hours. I'm sure when we look at Intel, it's probably going to be less. Yeah, in fact, Intel's actually down in the after hours. Wouldn't recommend Intel at the current time. I think the way to double down is on Nvidia. Well, certainly, you can come in here, and if you want to buy the parabolic move, by all means, it's a momentum play, and you can buy that. There's certainly option strategy as well. Probably the cleanest way to do it is the SMH, which I believe its number one holding is Nvidia. You're seeing in the after hours, this is moving 6%, so not quite the beta that you have owning Nvidia directly, but this is really directed at a lot. I'm sure most of you viewing this video already have a position in Nvidia. A way to kind of double down on it without taking just direct buying of Nvidia, adding to your cost position, is actually buy a derivative of it. The SMH, TSM would probably be my number one and number two choice in order to play continued upside in Nvidia without giving yourself even more exposure to something that is run well north of 100% in just a couple of months. Folks, that was Nvidia's Q1. That wraps up this quarter's earnings season. When it comes to the major cap tech stocks, we'll certainly be back again on Friday to discuss this even more. We'll certainly take a look. You almost want to take a screenshot of this and see how much these are going to adjust over the next couple of days. What I am very interested in see is, look, the rest of this year is going to be fantastic for Nvidia. A lot of that is priced into the stock. Now we're starting to look a year forward, 2 years forward. Where is Wall Street going to put these numbers since the company has already achieved this for the upcoming quarter? Can we see this company putting up 15, 20, $30 billion in a quarter? Are there any Wall Street analysts going to project that when we start looking out 2 years? Because if you start projecting that type of revenue, well, all of a sudden a $1 trillion valuation, while still relatively rich, not as crazy as it might seem on the surface. That was NVIDIA. Will be back again on Friday for the Fang Stock Recap Show, likely at its usual time. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day out there. We'll be back again soon. Good luck with your investments.